Alan, I think I might just start if that's okay, and we've got quite a lot to get through, and then is that all right? You just let people in as and when
Yeah,
they...
I'll just keep an eye on letting people in the meantime.
Arrive at the waiting room. Great. Okay, doke. Well, happy afternoon to everybody. Thank you for giving us an hour of your time to look at this fascinating topic of human behaviour. There's no way we're going to understand that in an hour, but hopefully you'll find that through this afternoon that you've got some useful ideas to think about. We're thinking particularly about how environmental programs can encourage people to adopt sustainable behaviours. So my colleague Alan is co-hosting today. We'll break up the content into chunks and we'll pause as we go so that there's time for us to ask questions or have some comments together in this group. But towards the end, we're going to break out into a couple of smaller groups to give you an opportunity to get some rich discussion going. So yes, usual protocol, pop your microphone on mute if you're not talking. Please feel free to pop questions in the chat as they come to your mind so that we can address them when we have those little pauses as we go. Okay, let's start. So here is the basic problem. We kind of know what people should do and need to do if we're going to live more sustainably. But knowing what people should do is almost never enough for people to change. So here's and can people see my screen? Yeah, my second screen can, good. So here's the essential kind of quandary. People need information to know what they should do, but it's almost never enough to make them actually change. Those who measure such things reckon that's about 20% of what we need to do to get people to change. So information on its own is almost never enough to get anyone to change anything. It's important because without knowing what they should be doing, they're in the dark. So we let them know what they should be doing, that's great, but it almost never gets them across the line. And we borrow a lot of our techniques and our thinking here, I guess, from the advertising industry that's constantly trying to get us to change our behaviors, but they're often selling very attractive products designed to make our lives easier, which is quite different from asking people to live a more environmentally responsible lifestyle. So the big question, I guess, is what makes people change and adopt more responsible behaviors? And you'll not be surprised to hear me say that there are no silver bullets, there are no easy answers. Otherwise, we would have no smokers, no alcoholics, no obesity, no domestic violence, and we'd all be living much more sustainably. But there is a useful body of research and a useful body of practice from people like ourselves working in this field that is very helpful to draw on. I'm going to start with this model, which I think some of you will be familiar with, the ISM model of behavior change, which is a really helpful model that illustrates that human behavior is really complex mix of factors that can helpfully be thought of as fitting into 3 layers of an onion, if you like. Right at the core, there's the individual themselves. And what makes up that individual, their skill set, their values, their habits, their beliefs, their emotions, and their personal experiences. So these things shape how we behave, our own individual selves. But we know that we're social beings. Much of our behavior is influenced by what people around us think is good and proper and appropriate. That's what peer pressure is all about. And of course, what the people around us think changes depending on what kind of peer groups we're part of, or what countries we're in, or what cultures we're a part of. But those things shape our behavior. And then finally, at the outside layer, the material layer, the dark purple layer, the world as it is actually really important, the situation that we live in. And material here means like real physical materials. So the existence of roads or recycling bins or broadband or what kind of technology is actually available. But it also includes other elements of that kind of external environment, like the laws of the land and the tax regime, etc. So the ISM model says that any successful intervention looking at behavior needs to think about your behavior through this lens, look at what's impacting behavior at all 3 of these levels, and then work across all of them. So effectively, the model says, if you're planning a project, get everyone who's interested into a room, get them identifying which factors at these 3 levels are important, and then design programs that address those. So for example, if we want to get more people cycling to work, Then we can look at the level of the individual. If someone doesn't have the confidence to ride a bike or know how to ride a bike or doesn't have the skill set to fix a bike, we can do that at the individual level. At the social level, we can make cycling to work more normal part of an office culture, for example, by regularly praising people who ride their bikes to work, or organizing office bikeability sessions, or even kind of after work bike rides, for example. And then at the material level, we need to make sure that workplaces have got safe covered cycle storage and showers for people to use, or places to store their wet gear, and even more importantly, can actually get to the office on safe riding routes. So Google ISM behavior change. In fact, Alan, I'm wondering if you could maybe just pop a link in the chat box to the ISM stuff. Worth saying that this was a kind of tool that was really developed by the Scottish Government, actually, and they've used it and applied it in a number of government initiatives. There's also well worth Googling shifting normal. And again, maybe Alan, you could pop a link to that in the box, but shifting normal was a way of looking at ISM specifically for climate change projects. So these things are, I think, 5, 6, 7 years old, but still a lot of the underlying thinking and practice there are very, very valid. So this model helps you see the rich range of things you need to address, but the question still is, how do you actually go about changing those things, particularly at the I and the S level? So I think we can all figure out, well, we need to put a new share cubicle in the office, that's fine, but how do you go about tackling the I and the M level, sorry, the I and the S level? And that's really what we're going to be focusing on for the rest of our session this afternoon. Now, I am unashamedly stealing stuff. I did a 3-day workshop run by a guy called Doug Mackenzie Moore from Canada, who's an academic who's researched this all his life and advised many national level government environmental behavior change programs. But Doug's got a website, cbsm.com, community-based social marketing. So just make a note of cbs.com. If you'd like to go and find more on anything that I'm sharing for the rest of this hour, you'll find that a really helpful resource, and you can sign up for regular newsletters from Doug and his people. So I am going to share 6 particular strategies that I think can be helpful as we're looking at behavior change projects. And again, this is really a précis of a 3-day course that Doug gives. At the end of this, I'm going to ask you in breakout rooms to think about how you could apply one or more of these ideas to your work, and to share that in a breakout group. So there's no falling asleep. Okay, as we go, please be thinking about how you could apply some of this stuff in your own context. And here is the first kind of strategy, and it's very simple, almost simplistic, but actually it's really worth just starting here, which is it's helpful to think to some extent of human behavior as being influenced by 2 opposing forces. There are in most actions some benefits that will accrue to me if I take that action, and there are some barriers or difficulties that I might experience in taking that action. And it's helpful to think on any behavior change about that, the tussle between those 2 things. What is it that is making it difficult for someone to do this, and what would make it a positive experience for them to do that? And ultimately, what we're trying to do in our projects is we're trying to sell the benefits, but we're trying to lower the barriers and address the barriers. So that's a helpful concept. But I think here's the thing: in order to do that well, we need to know what those benefits are, and we need to know what those barriers are. And the big error here is to rush into assuming that we know what they are, or specifically to assume that the benefits and barriers that I experience in doing that are what the people I'm trying to communicate with will experience. So a simple example, there was a program in Canada that aimed to reduce car fuel by encouraging people to inflate their tires properly. So they spent ages trying to, with this big message, save money, check your tire pressure. But when they did the research, they found that the incentive of saving a few cents wasn't enough to make people bother with doing this. But through that research, they discovered that road safety was actually a much more important factor in people's thinking. And when they could demonstrate the link between tire pressure and road safety, they found there was much more uptake of people keeping their tires at proper pressure. So even though it was a carbon saving project, their message switched from inflate your tires to save carbon and money to keep your tires inflated and to stay safe. So do your research. Now, there's a lot of great research out there already. We don't need to reinvent the wheel, but actually it's quite audience specific. So it's well worth talking to your own audience and your own community to make sure you understand that. And that's where this next point comes in, which is it's very, very specific to different groups of people. They'll often have different perceptions of what the barriers are and perceive different benefits. So for example, in many of the projects we're doing, it may be that poorer families are more motivated by saving money in the, let's say, for example, in the issue of food waste, whereas middle-class families might be more motivated to reduce their carbon footprint, or through the idea of eating a healthier diet, the idea that a low carbon diet might be a healthier diet. So it's just a really important point that the strategies that you use may well need to be quite different for different audiences. So understand your audiences and tailor your approach. There isn't often a one-size-fits-all for behavior change kind of stuff. And then just a final word on benefits and barriers. People are more excited about doing something for a win than they are on removing a barrier. So both these things are important, but focus more of your time on understanding and selling the benefits than you do on addressing the barriers. That tends to provide a better return on investment. Another little kind of, so I'm just going to throw a few of these I found very interesting findings in here. People are usually more motivated to avoid losing money than they are to save money. Now, what that means is that if you say to someone, you could save £100 by, I don't know, turning your thermostat down, for example, you are more likely to get a response if you say to people, you are currently losing £100 a year. In order to stop that, you can do this. So it's just the way our brains are wired. So I am just going to pause there very quickly and ask if anyone wants to pop back with a question or a comment on this particular question. Has anyone ever done some careful research into benefits or barriers, or in the course of your work discovered that the benefits you were trying to sell weren't the ones that people actually saw, or the barriers you were trying to address weren't in fact the barriers that people were facing? So I can't see it all, so I'm going to rely on Alan if you see anyone to just give you the mic for a minute. Or again, feel free to use the chat box if you prefer to pop your questions in the chat or your comments there.
I don't mind saying something if
Great, please do.
Sorry, hi, I'm Rachel from Macabre Environmental Group. I just think everything you said there really makes sense. I work on the energy efficiency side of our low carbon Macabre project, and people definitely seem more switched on to what you're doing when you talk about helping them with money rather than reducing a carbon footprint. And then, but I think it's also important to say that they can come hand in hand. So it's like win-win, you know, in more ways than one. But yeah, I just want to say I think that really makes sense.
Great, thanks. Anyone else had any experience of kind of thinking quite carefully about this, the idea of benefits and barriers?
I think an obvious one for me is thinking about your pension. It's kind of, you know, long-term finance is quite often something that people will just put off by default because it's something that's dealt with a lot further off in life, if you like. So thinking about long-term planning compared to short-term opportunities of, you know, 10% discounts off this and 5% voucher for that, you tend to financially more likely to react to short-term number money-based items rather than the huge big long boring you know, life assurance or pension, that kind of stuff.
We're certainly, as humans, we're often wired to favor short-term over long-term. Ian, I can see your hand up. Do you have any kind of experience from this within your work?
Thanks. Yeah, so it was actually really interesting to hear Rachel say that finances are a big motivation for people, because what we've found in Selkirk so far is that when we've asked people that have accessed energy support, most people have been motivated by wanting to make a change for the environment. So just kind of supports what you said, Alistair, about different audiences having different specific motivations. Yeah.
Great. And just that golden rule, don't assume everybody thinks like we do. And actually, those of us who are in the sector tend to be quite driven by environmental values, and that's not always the case with people that we work with. Great. I'm just going to keep going because there's a lot to get through, but do continue to pop questions or comments in the chat. We're now going to get into what I think is a really interesting and quite fun stuff here. I'm going to call the next 5 of our 6 ideas human behavior hacks. So how to hack human behavior. And here's hack number 1, strategy number 2, public and durable commitments. And it's a really killer strategy because actually it cleverly combines quite a few of the other hacks I'll talk about in a minute. So what is a public and durable commitment? It's basically asking people to make a public commitment to doing something that's visible in a way that everyone in their community can see, and in a way that's quite long lasting. So some examples of that would be, and there's some great research here, asking, so in parts of the US, pollution from runoff on big lawns is a big issue. People put lots of chemicals on their lawns. It's not regulated. It washes into the streams and disaster. And so a lot of efforts in North America trying to get people to reduce the chemicals they put on their grass. And what the research has found is that if you ask people to put a sign up on their lawn saying they're not using weed killers, people are much more likely to go on to not put weed killers on their lawns if there's a sign in their garden. Another example, a project looking at the problem of car idling at the playground, just 100 big SUVs sitting at the playground gates, churning out diesel fumes for half an hour. When people were engaged by project staff, if they agreed to put a car sticker in their car about the importance of not idling at the playground, they were much more likely themselves to not idle if they had a sticker in their car. And the reason this works is because we like to think of ourselves as people who do what we say. And if that commitment is a public commitment, then we're much more likely to do it. But there's also some other clever stuff going on here, which I'll come back to this, but you'll see how this links into some of the other stuff I'm going to talk about. So here's human behavior hack number 2. So here's the question. When you get on a train or a bus and you look for a seat, where do you go? Where do you sit? Okay. Chances are you look for the seat that's emptiest or the seat that's furthest away from people who are on the bus. So follow-up question, who taught you to do that? I bet you were never on a training course about choosing bus seats. I bet it was never covered off in your school curriculum. I bet you nobody ever gave you a leaflet telling you what you should do when you get on a bus. But we do that because we know it's what's expected of us, right? Okay, and we feel uncomfortable if we break the social norm. If you want to know what it's like, just practice. Just go out and sit beside someone on a bus when there's an empty seat. And you'll soon know that, you'll feel that, like there'll be a physical bodily response there. You'll feel the kind of the sweat and the adrenaline. So social norms basically drive a huge amount of our behavior, and they do it unconsciously, and because people are uncomfortable breaking social norms. So what we want to try and do here, if you like, is make environmental behaviors into social norms, which means basically getting people to think that environmentally responsible behavior is what everybody does, so that they begin to feel uncomfortable if they don't do that. And I think this is a really useful insight. Social norms are probably the most powerful strategy for changing behavior in people who are not intrinsically motivated to do that thing. Okay, so someone might not put their litter in a bin because they care about the environment or plastics in the ocean. But if they believe that people in their community will be mad or think poorly of them, or there'll be some kind of negative feedback on them, then they'll just do what's expected of them without even thinking about it. So to really exploit social norms, we need to make positive behaviors visible. Okay, so that people think, oh, most people do this. And that comes naturally in some things, doesn't it? So putting a recycle bin out, okay, we can see all of our neighbors put their recycle bins out. So, that's building a social norm. Solar panels are another example of something. If you go to where Alan lives, every second house is a solar panel. And there's a kind of an understanding in that community that it's a very normal thing for people to do. In fact, it's a responsible thing for people to do. But a lot of environmentally responsible behaviors aren't so visible. And so we've got to find a way to make those things visible. And there's some nice examples of that I'm going to share. So this was a project that was addressing the problem of anglers leaving used fishing tackle at the fishing site, which was harming wildlife. So project staff went to these common places, engaged with anglers, explained the issue, asked anglers if they would be willing to change their behavior, but then crucially asked anglers if they would be willing to have a photo taken of them holding up a board that says they're committing to taking all their tackle away from the site. And then, would you be willing for us to put that photograph on a signboard here by the entrance to the pier, along with the photographs of everybody else who's making that commitment? So this was a little bit experimental, but how many anglers do you think would agree to doing such a thing if you went and approached them? Well, surprisingly, 100% of the anglers they engaged with said, yeah, okay, we'll do that. So they made a visible public commitment, the strategy one, but then used this to create a new sense of a social norm by putting all these photographs together and a signboard, so that any future angler rocking up there walks past the signboard and sees the whole community is taking this seriously. They were starting to create this social norm. Another really lovely example from recycling. So there was a project. There was a new set of flats. People had just moved in, and this project wanted to encourage those flat owners to recycle properly. So they went door to door, explained the new facilities outside, asked people if they would be willing to recycle their stuff. And about 70% of those they engaged with said yes, they were happy to do that. But here's the interesting bit. They then asked those 70%, would you be willing to put this sticker on your mailbox in the car park that says you're taking part in the recycling program? And again, almost everyone who said they were happy to recycle said, yeah, sure, I'll put my sticker there. So here's the question. How do you think the 30% who didn't agree to take part felt when they saw that most of their neighbors were recycling? And not surprisingly, a large proportion of that 30% subsequently contacted the project to ask if they could join in. So this behavior, effectively what the project did was they created this new social norm, and they felt uncomfortable about being outed as non-compliant. So it's another example of how strategy one, public and durable commitments, when you put them together into place, can help to create new social norms. So I know I'm using lots of words and terms here, but I'm going to say this one again, because I think if there's one thing that you jot down and take away from this, public and durable commitments grouped together often can give you new social norms. Right, that sounds like an awful lot of verbiage there. So I'm going to pause again, and just for 5 minutes in case anyone wants to kind of come back and double check something, or just reflect on how any of this is kind of resonating with you in your experience. And again, Alan, I can't really see many people on the screen, so if you see any hands up, invite people to chat.
Yeah, nor me. So stick your little hand up on the reaction button if you can, or just unmute yourself and say hello. David, you've got your hand up first.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention about the plastic straw thing. Seems to have become a real sort of social norm almost, and it's been adopted by businesses. But I just, it's that interesting thing of, you go into Starbucks or McDonald's and they've changed their plastic straws to paper straws, and they've got these like strong environmental credentials that they're holding up, but it's almost like it's not enough. It's not quite enough. But it's interesting to see that people that has become a bit more of a social norm, and you'll see people saying, "Oh, I'm pro-environmental because I've got my reusable straw now, or my reusable cup." But yeah, I think it's interesting that it's become more of a thing, but it's almost like needing to go to the next level and be bigger and better. So yeah, just when we were talking about it, that was that's a great example that came into my head.
I'm going to come back to that, David, later on, because that's a great example. Fiona, I can see your hands up as well.
Yeah, I totally agree with everything that you've just said about, like, obviously the other people seeing other folk doing it, then they want to show that they're doing it as well. But the thing I find probably most challenging is, how do you get that first group of people to do something new? That's the thing we found most tricky, getting the ball rolling. Yeah,
very true. And it's interesting, both the examples I shared, there weren't shortcuts. Effectively, there were people engaging in one-to-one conversations with the audience. It wasn't an easy single social media tweet or a flyer through the door. It was a conversation, and we'll maybe come back to that again. Chad, I can see you've got your hand up.
I know it's not as simple as you've just portrayed it. I guess it just popped into my head when you were talking about that last 30%, and yeah, they want to participate now too. It's the kind of danger of it being seen as bullying or the alienation, someone just digging their heels in because they're like, oh, I'm not just going to go along with everybody else because of that individuality. So I think just the thing prior to that happening is that kind of seeding. Somebody said to me once, seeding the seeds of discontent, where you kind of talk to a lot of people so that the idea is almost theirs. Like, what are you not happy about? What's happening here? So when the idea finally comes to fruition, it's already in their head. They're like, yeah, I've been worried about that for a while. Now there's a solution. I guess the pace, just being careful about the pacing of those kind of actions.
Yeah, no, good point. Okay, again, I'm going to keep moving because there's quite a lot to get through, and gosh, we're nearly halfway through already. Okay, here's another question. How did you hear about the last great book you read or the last great TV series you watched? What influenced you to read that book or watch that TV series? And I'm guessing it was probably somebody you knew, a friend, a family member, a colleague, in many cases, who recommended something. And that's basically social diffusion at work. It's this idea that much of our behavior comes through conversations with people that we trust. And a large number of those people are either a friend, a colleague, or a family member. So the challenge or the opportunity as we design behavior change programs is to think about how we can exploit this fundamental aspect of our human nature, which is that what we do is strongly shaped by the people we know and respect. So the challenge is to get environmental behaviors being shared widely in our communities, not just, and I'm going to say not primarily actually by paid project staff, which I guess a good number of us are, but actually by ordinary people, by volunteers and ordinary community members, because they have much more influence in people's lives than project staff do. So how do we get this social diffusion going? Well, a couple of thoughts, and again, you're going to see the linkages here. These visible, durable commitments are an important part of that. So it's just helpful all the time to think about how do we make invisible behaviors visible. People put their dog poo in the bin. People have installed a heat pump. These are significant things, but they're not always visible. So if we want to exploit social diffusion, I have to know that my friends put a heat pump in, or actually I have to know that they're taking their responsible dog owner. And often making those things visible comes through stickers and signs and photos and those sorts of things. And that have you ever noticed that when any of your neighbors get their driveway done, a lot of them end up with a sign in the front grass saying, I've got my driveway done, and here's the phone number of the people who did it. And that's because that's what they're making use of here. They're making it even more visible in order to get that social diffusion. So you go, my neighbor's doing that. I should maybe, my driveway's looking a bit tatty. I should maybe do something about that. Use local champions and volunteers where you can, and people who are well respected and well known in your communities. And from my experience of certain CCF groups, I know that's a really important strategy that a lot of people use. And think about who in your community has that influence within their particular subgroup. So a lot of some CCF groups have done great work with faith leaders, for example, and using them to share messages, or leaders of other societies in their community. There's a nice example I came across of a football club actually that was doing a lot of work on single-use plastic bottles, and the messages were coming from the football coaches. So they weren't coming from the project staff, who would say that because you're paid to say that, but recognizing that the people that had influence in the lives of young footballing enthusiasts were their coaches. So their coaches were approached and coached to have those conversations and to communicate those messages. And I think this last point is really, really key. Conversations are actually what makes social diffusion happen. Conversations are social diffusion in action. So we need to be making conversations happen. And I know many groups have hosted climate conversations, and that's been quite a big part of what you've done. And sometimes we think, enough talking, we need action. But the reality is that lots of those little conversations happening between people who respect each other will make action happen. And I think some interesting research that was presented when I did this course was suggest it's really worth kind of investing in training and supporting your volunteers to have those conversations. It's not always easy to bring up climate change or bring up these topics, but providing an opportunity for volunteers to role play, to try, actually can really build their confidence to make those conversations happen and to make them effective. I think what's also really, we had some discussion around this, well, what about conversations on social media? Do they have an impact? And the research says that, yes, they can have an impact. Again, if the messages are coming from an individual to somebody they know and respect, then that has an impact. But a far higher impact than a project tweeting a message to all its followers saying, come on guys, we need to be doing this. That that has limited value. Much more powerful if you can be encouraging people in your community to be sharing those messages through their own channels. And interestingly, print media almost never gets social diffusion. It's very weak in terms of getting this social diffusion going. So maximize human conversations is the key message here. Let's look at the next hack. Another question: how many times have you got to the cafe and realized that your reusable cup was at home, or got to the supermarket and realized that your reusable bag was in the car or at home? So the reality is that people forget to do the right thing. Even people who want to do the right thing can frequently forget, and prompts tackle this issue and are a key way of helping people to form habits. And habits are actually really important because habits and unconscious behavior actually account for nearly half of our behavior. We do things because we're creatures of habit. And prompts are a good way to help people who want to do the right thing to form a habit. That's why if you sign up for an exercise app or a language app, they'll prompt you, come on, keep going. They'll encourage you to do the right thing. So it's worth having a think about how we apply this to environmental behavior change projects, and what a suitable prompt might be. It could be something like a tab on your keyring reminding you to take your reusable cup to work, or a sticker on your car reminding you to turn off your engine when you're idling, or a timer in the shower reminding you not to stay in there for too long. This is I don't know about your house, this is a prompt that we put up in our house, and it's been there ever since the start of the pandemic. The number of times in the first 6 months we rocked up at the supermarket or somewhere without a mask, but we've all started to form that habit, and then we start to do it without thinking. But prompts can be a really useful way of forming habits. Now, I found this really interesting. There's a growing body of practice that is using text messaging to help prompt people, using automated software and often quite a bit of humor along the way. So when somebody agrees to make a commitment to doing an action, they're also asked if they'd be willing to receive a limited number of text prompts to help remind them. So there's an interesting example of a project that wanted people to install a low flow shower head on their shower to save water and energy. And they were giving these away at supermarkets, and of course everyone wants a freebie, so people take it and off they go. But of course, when they went back 2 months later to find out how many people had actually installed them, a lot of them were just sitting in the garage. But what they found was, when they said to people, would you be comfortable with us sending you a text, maybe once a week for the next 2 or 3 weeks, just to remind you to fit this? Would you be willing for us to do that? Most people said, yeah, sure. And when they went back and surveyed, not surprisingly, they found out that those who'd been prompted had a significantly higher uptake rate. There's a project that was looking at menu planning to reduce food waste. And they, following the workshops, they said to people, when do you normally do your weekly shop, or when do you do your sort of weekly meal planning? Would you be happy for us to send you, maybe for the first month, a weekly text prompt around that time, just to remind you to think about some of the things we talked about today? And most people said yes, sure. So kind of interesting to think about how technology can perhaps be a prompt here, but it can often just be the good old sticker, or a tag on your dog lead that says pick up after your dog. And maybe see some of these linkages, because a prompt can also be a visible and durable commitment. So I put a sticker on my dog lead saying, remember the poo bag. But if I'm out with a sticker on my lead saying, remember the poo bag, I'm much more likely to actually do that action myself. Okay, last behavior hack, and then we'll take some time in breakout rooms. And that is is understand and think about the really strong and important role of self-identity. I think this is perhaps one of the most important things to think about. And it's just this simple reality that we often behave in ways that affirm our sense of who we are. So I'll give you an example. My colleagues will know I'm a bit of a litter nut. You know, I can't walk past a piece of litter in my woodland without picking it up. But I don't do that because of benefits and barriers. I don't do that because I get a great kick out of picking up other people's rubbish. I do it because I believe strongly that I'm someone who cares about the planet. And if I walk past litter in my woods, I experience what psychologists describe as cognitive dissonance, that real unsettling feeling that actually we can often feel inside us around an inconsistency with our actions and our sense of self and sense of identity. So that what this means for our projects is, wherever possible, reinforce people's sense of caring for the environment. And because by doing that, we are helping to strengthen their sense of identity. And that comes back to the point that was made about plastic straws. So in some ways, you know, I don't take plastic straws well, you know, great, but actually does that, you know, the environmental challenges around us are much stronger than plastic straws. But the research that says that somebody who's already made a commitment to do something, take an environmental action, has started to build a bit of a sense of identity. I'm the kind of person who doesn't use plastic straws. I'm the kind of person who thinks the environment's important. And we can basically build on that and reinforce that. So one way of doing that would be, let's say we were talking about heat pumps to householders. Rather than just saying you should install a heat pump because it'll reduce your carbon footprint, better to say, you know, we know you care about the environment because you were part of that action we took on straws. Did you know that installing a heat pump could very significantly reduce your carbon footprint and further lighten your kind of environmental impact, as well as save you money? So we're kind of making use of this important sense of identity and this idea of cognitive dissonance. So yeah, wherever possible in our work, think about how we can reinforce those messages. So rather than berating our audience and saying, you're a terrible bunch of environmental vandals, try if we can almost do the opposite and say, you know, we know you guys are recycling faithfully and regularly every week. That's fantastic. So we know that you know, caring for the environment is important to you. Can we talk to you about something else you could be doing that would really help to, etc. So build on that. I think this is quite interesting. We tend to think the logical flow is right. You change someone's mind and then their behavior follows, and that can happen, but sometimes the opposite can happen. As people start to build habits, start to frame their own sense of identity as being someone who cares, and they behave themselves into thinking differently. I'm just going to go back a slide, actually, if I can. No, it's maybe the next one. Yeah, so repetitive actions and regular actions have a much bigger impact on identity formation than one-off actions. So, you know, a practical example of that would be in KSB, we do a lot of work on litter. And, you know, for years, we've had a big annual push to our Spring Clean program, where we get communities together to do a big clear up job. But the research tells us that's maybe not the smartest way actually to get behavior change. Far better maybe to be organizing a monthly community litter pick, or maybe even asking, what we've done in my community is we have a monthly litter pick now, but anyone who comes gets a free litter picker and they get a few free bags. So when they finish the community litter pick, they go home with a litter picker and a couple of bags, and we say, you know, feel free to, next time you're out walking, just pick a little bit up, you know, and we'll see you here in a month's time. So we're starting to kind of build this much more repetitive behavior, which has this bigger impact on identity. I'm not sure if it's, no, I'm gonna, yeah. Just before we finish, I think something that's important here is that, and I think this is an opportunity for CCF groups who often are working on a number of different environmental issues. I think there's a real opportunity here, because if you're working on food waste, you might think that's got nothing to do with, I don't know, low carbon heating, for example, and on the face of it, it doesn't. But there's a real strength to kind of knitting different environmental behavior change messages and campaigns together. Because if you've already been working on, for example, you know, reducing food waste with your population, they're likely to be in a much better place to actually start to think about another additional behavior change strand, whether that's insulating their home or biking to work or whatever it is. So although sometimes I know some projects think, gosh, we're trying to get people to do so many things, is it all too much? Maybe we should simplify. And I think, we can sometimes communicate too many messages, but there is evidence to say that actually a program that is working on 3 or 4 issues in parallel is more effective than 3 or 4 separate projects all working on those issues independently, because we can get the self-identity thing going. All right, I have garbled for long enough. I'm going to share one last example, actually. So about 2 months ago, I was invited to join a workshop of influential, high-thinking people on the issue of how we get more people to install heat pumps, because that's going to be a big part of reducing our carbon footprint. And in the meeting was one of EDF Energy's senior executives, and he was the guy at EDF who had been tasked with the responsibility of growing their market in the heat pump market, right? So energy companies can see potentially increased revenue stream because more people are going to heat their houses on electricity rather than gas. So we were chatting about this, and I said, "Oh, I've just installed a heat pump actually, in my house, and I didn't really do it primarily. I've kind of got the money to do it, and I care about this issue, so I went for it, and it's been fantastic." And he said, "Oh, my boiler blew up the other day, and I looked at a heat pump, but I decided in the end that the boiler was going to be a bit cheaper, so I went with the gas boiler." And that was just a kind of classic case in my mind of how that guy was approaching this task in an academic kind of rational way, but there was no sense of his identity involved in that decision as to whether he was going to move to a heat pump or not. And I remember kind of thinking at the time that the strategy for him is to say, this is recorded, so I'll mind my French here, but never mind the cost. Who are you, and what is your legacy, and and how does the fact that you are, that this choice will have a significant impact on your footprint on the planet, where does that feature in your decision making here? So yeah, identity and our sense of self is a really important element, and clearly for him that just wasn't in the running at all. Okay, I'm going to shut up now, and this is where I'm going to ask Alan to pop us into a couple of groups, and we've got 10 minutes just, I guess, to reflect together on, from all the different, the 6 ideas that I've shared, could you see one or more of these actually having an application in your line of work in what you're doing? So just take some time to quickly share that. Don't spend too much time in the groups introducing yourself and saying who you are and what you do, otherwise the 10 minutes will disappear. So just jump right in if each of you in turn just wants to share a little bit about whether you could see any of this actually applying to any of your projects. And then we will come back for the last few minutes. So just to kind of share anything that your group found particularly striking as a really positive example that could work. So it's time to start applying and time for me to stop talking. So I'll hand over to Alan and let him put us in groups. And Alan, I'm guessing I'll stop sharing. You and I could pop into a group each, just so we can listen in.
We'll split into 2 groups. Yeah.
Good. Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope that was helpful. We've just got a last couple of minutes to wind up, but I just wondered if there was anything interesting in your meeting room. If you heard someone say something, or you yourself suddenly had a bit of an aha moment that you wanted to share, then encourage the rest of us by sharing it. So open floor.
I had just said before we kind of came back that getting our volunteers, the community that we already have, to kind of spread the word is something that you mentioned. I think is a good because they already have the passion. So getting them to kind of spread the words to people, family and friends, maybe are not thinking about this stuff as much. If they see the passion that their friends, they have for the project that they're giving their time for, and it's a good way of getting the message out there.
Great. And I think for me, when I was listening to the guy giving the original presentation, that idea of, take a little bit of time to kind of, understand any anxieties they have around that. And actually the power of role play, get them to role play those conversations, get them to role play how they might respond to kind of the grumpy uncle, who thinks climate change is a hoax, or people feel a lot more confident when they've kind of been through those things a few times, those conversations. Yeah. Anyone else?
I think it's just acknowledging the repetition that everybody needs with these behavioral change and with training and support, because I think often we think, oh, we've designed a fantastic training for half a day or whatever, send them out there and they should be perfectly skilled to do it, but it doesn't work that way, and like you often get busy with other things, but supporting and following up with volunteers and just constantly giving them new tips and ideas and kind of keep the passion alive with them so they can take it on, because there can be a real impasse between the staff, the volunteers, and then like the end user.
It's interesting, isn't it? It's often the person who's got the university degree and the professional background behind them isn't actually the person who has the most influence, and yet they're the people we often tend to put at the front of the hall to say the thing, isn't it? Often the people who are going to have more impact are those who are maybe not so used to that and thinking about how we use that resource better. Yeah. Great. Anyone else?
Just adding to that though, I think a really nice thing about I think most of these CCF funded projects is that I think we probably all do live in our community, and that's really important. We're not coming from outside of the community, we're not a stranger, we live here, we know what it's like here, we understand, and I think that's just thinking in a positive way, that's a really nice thing about what we do.
Absolutely agree. We tell the Scottish Government that often.
I'll just add one other thing actually that I was thinking about. I read it, I think about a year ago. I'm trying to look at it on the bookshelf, but there's a really good book called Navigating Environmental Attitudes. I can't remember the name of the man who wrote it, but it fits in really well with everything that's been discussed today. And he talks about things in fixes a lot. So there's a lot of people think too much about behavioural fixes and trying to get people to change their behaviours, but there's easier ways to try and make change. It could be through structural fixes and other things like that. It's by Thomas A. Heberlein, but I can send an email out to anyone who's interested.
Rachel, can you links. Stick the title in the chat, and then
yeah, we'll do.
Can put that. That's great. Yeah.
But it links really well with with all the 6 things you were talking about. Very similar.
Great. Well, we're on the verge of the clock striking. So Alan and I are in a hurry. We'll hang around for a bit. So if anyone wants just to hang in here and enjoy a little bit of post-meeting chat and keep riffing on some of these ideas, that's great. But if you need to rush on to your next thing, please feel free to do that. We don't have a formal evaluation form, but before you go, if you wouldn't mind just popping a quick comment on the chat, if there's anything you particularly enjoyed about today, or if there's anything you feel that we could have done to make it better or anything else, then please do that before you finish up. And yeah, we will pop a kind of topped and tailed version of this on our YouTube channel at some point. So if you want to come back and remind yourself, or you think any of this would have been helpful for any of your colleagues, then you can signpost them to that. But thank you for giving us your hour. I hope that's been useful. And yeah, would love to hear if any of you try any of these things, how it goes. Thank you.
Did you say that previous talks, because I missed one last week, I think, have been put on YouTube?
I'm not sure they have been yet, but they will be. Yeah, they've been recorded, so they will go up. Yeah, I'll check with Tim, and we'll put the word around the CCF community. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Anne. Good luck with your project.
Thank you. I think we need it.
Yeah. Well, there we are.